8 soldiers marched into the jungle. Local memory says only fear came back out. What followed was never written into official records, only whispered, buried, and warned about after dark. In 1768, during the final months of the rainy season, a small Spanish detachment was ordered inland from the Philippine coast. On paper, it was routine. A village had stopped paying tribute. 2 soldiers sent to investigate had vanished. The colonial administration wanted answers, quick ones. What waited beyond the river was not rebellion, not bandits, not sickness. It was silence. The kind of silence that spreads before danger arrives. The soldiers noticed it immediately. As they passed coastal settlements, conversations died mid-sentence. Doors were shut long before sunset. People avoided eye contact. Mothers pulled children indoors, as if nightfall carried teeth. No one followed them inland. No one warned them openly. Fear had taught the locals that names spoken aloud traveled too far by the second day. The jungle closed in, thick, wet breathing, the kind of terrain that swallowed sound and returned it wrong, according to later testimony fragments preserved. In letters and church records, the voices began before nightfall. At first, it sounded familiar. A name spoken softly, a laugh that belonged to someone behind you, footsteps where no one stood. This is where history hesitates. Because trained soldiers don't panic over sounds. They don't fear shadows. And yet, by the time darkness fell, these men were no longer marching with confidence. They were listening, watching, counting each other again and again. Something was already among them. The official orders had arrived in Intramuros. Inside the stone walls of Manila, carried by a courier whose boots were still caked with river mud. No ceremony, no announcement, just a sealed letter read aloud to a line of sweating men. A village inland from the coast of Pan had gone silent. 2 soldiers never returned. A local friar reported villagers refusing confession and hiding after dark. The alcalde wanted soldiers. Questions. Lieutenant Ortega chose 8 men. He selected those who could march through mud without complaint. Men who would not freeze when the jungle pressed in close. Among them was Corporal Miguel de Roas, born in Cadiz, but raised in the islands long enough to speak local tongues, and recognize when fear was being hidden behind obedience. Sergeant Ruiz was assigned as well. Older, scarred, quiet in the way. Men get when they've learned that bravado doesn't stop bullets, or worse. There was also Private Mateo Llorente, new, eager, barely old enough to shave. The kind of soldier who still believes survival was earned by courage alone. 2 others, Castano and Figueroa, were good shots but nervous talkers. And finally, a Friar Fray Esteban, sent by his order. He knew the countryside, knew the people, and he claimed he was not afraid to walk into huts where death waited. They departed at dawn aboard a small coastal sloop loaded with rice, powder, and certainty. The sea was calm, gray. Lieutenant Ortega leaned against the rail and joked that the missing men were likely drunk in some inland hut. Sergeant Luis did not laugh. He checked the flints on every musket himself. They reached the coastal post 2 days later. It was a low fort of wood and earth, its cannons long unused. The commander there greeted them with relief. He tried to hide. His eyes were fever-bright. He confirmed the names of the missing men, confirmed they had taken an interpreter and porters. None. Returned no one from the river settlements would guide them inland. When asked why, the villagers only pointed upriver. Some made signs with their hands, quick motions that ended at the throat or stomach. Signs Miguel did not like. That night, Miguel spoke with the interpreter. A baptized local named Tomas. The man touched the cross at his neck constantly as, if afraid it might vanish, they say there is an Aswang, Tomas finally said. The word was not unfamiliar. Miguel had heard it whispered in Manila when children died suddenly. He had also heard soldiers laugh at it. He did not laugh now. Tomas explained what the villagers believed, that it wore a human face by day, that it changed by night, that it took animals first, then people, that it left little blood, that it could walk among them, and no one would know until it was too late, Miguel offered. Rational answers. Bandits. Disease. Desertion. Tomas nodded, but his fingers never left the cross. Freya Staben joined them and asked what the people had confessed. "They do not confess," Tomas said. "They do not come out." Gah! The friar insisted fear made people foolish, that demons hid only in superstition, that animals could be hunted. His voice was confident, but confidence, as the jungle would soon teach them, does not equal safety. Before departure, Sergeant Ruiz purchased extra salt and vinegar from the market. Lieutenant Ortega mocked him, asking if he planned to pickle rebels. Ruiz did not respond. He also traded for a length of stingray tail, wrapped it carefully, packed it away. Mateo watched with wide eyes. They traveled a priver in narrow boats. Water ran brown and fast. Insects moved in clouds. The porters paddled in silence. Tomas scanned the tree line constantly. When the river narrowed, they went on foot. The jungle closed around them like a mouth. Mud sucked at boots. Leeches clung to ankles. Mateo gagged at the sight of his own blood. Ruiz showed him how to remove them slowly. No panic. No wasted movement. They passed a goat pen ripped outward. Hair clung to broken wood. The ground was trampled. No clear tracks. Only deep impressions and smears. Castano suggested a large animal. Ortega shut him down. Tomas did not look long. He stared into the trees instead. By evening, they reached a hamlet of huts on stilts. Smoke rose, but no one greeted them. Children vanished behind posts. Dogs hid beneath huts, tails tucked, silent. That silence was wrong. The villagers offered rice and fish, asked them to leave before dark. Ortega laughed. An old man stepped forward, hands open, eyes lowered. He begged through Tomas' translation. He said they could not fight it, that the soldiers would bring it with them. Ortega grabbed the man's shirt and lifted him onto his toes. The fear in the old man's eyes was not from pain, it was from certainty. As night fell, the jungle changed its voice. Crickets. Frogs. Then something else. A tapping sound, steady, distant, then closer. Ruiz placed the stingray tail beside him. Watches were posted. Miguel stood with Mateo, telling him to breathe, to watch the edge of the firelight. The tapping came again. From above, from the trees, from beneath a hut, a shadow moved. A dog yelped, once and went silent. No struggle, no blood, no sound afterward. The villagers did not scream. They stayed silent. Ruiz stepped beside them. "Do not fire unless you see it," he said. "Do not chase." Mateo whispered, "What is it?" Ruiz watched the darkness. "It is hunting," he said, "and it knows we arrived." And somewhere beyond the firelight, something listened. The villagers believed silence could save them. They were wrong. Because once the first scream came, there would be no stopping what followed. The scream came just before dawn. It was sharp, short, cut off as if a hand had closed around it from the inside. Every soldier was awake instantly. Lieutenant Ortega shouted orders, his voice cracking through the huts like a whip. Men scrambled to their feet, muskets half-loaded, boots slipping in the mud. The ladder of the nearest hut shook violently. As people inside moved in panic, Freya Staben called out for them to open the door. No answer. Sergeant Ruiz did not wait. He pushed past Ortega and climbed first, musket slung across his back, knife in hand. Ortega followed, then Corporal Miguel close behind. Inside, the hut stank of smoke, sweat, and terror. A family huddled against the wall. A woman covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide, unable to stop shaking. A man clutched a farming blade uselessly. On the floor lay a boy, no older than 10. His eyes were open. His chest did not move. There was no blood, no wounds anyone could see. Just faint marks along the neck like bruises made by fingers that were too long, too thin. Freya Staben knelt beside the child and pressed his fingers to the throat. He said nothing. He did not need to. The boy was dead. and whatever had taken him had done so silently, efficiently, and without struggle. Miguel felt his stomach tighten. He had seen death before combat, sickness, executions, but this was different. This felt selective, intentional, as if something had chosen the child. Outside, the villagers remained hidden, no wailing, no mourning cries, only shutters closing tighter, mothers pulling children farther back into darkness. Fear had taught them a rule. Noise invites attention. Ortega demanded answers. He ordered Tomas to translate his questions, his frustration growing with every second. Who did this? Where did it go? Why didn't anyone fight back? The villagers did not answer directly. They only repeated one thing. It walks. Miguel noticed something else. Fresh bundles of garlic hung overnight near the ladders. Bowls of salt had been overturned, scattered in hurried lines across the ground. Thorns had been dragged into rough circles beneath the huts. This was not superstition passed down over generations. This was preparation. Recent, desperate. Sergeant Ruiz pulled Miguel aside. "This is not the first death," he said quietly. "Just the first one we saw." Miguel nodded. He believed it. At sunrise, they buried the boy outside the hamlet. No prayers were spoken aloud. Fray Esteban whispered blessings under his breath. His confidence from the previous day noticeably shaken, Ortega insisted they continue inland. The larger village, the one that had stopped paying tribute, was only half a day's march away. He argued that fear had already cost them time. Fear would not dictate military orders. Ruiz did not argue, but he quietly distributed salt among the men. He showed Mateo how to keep it dry, how to mark the ground lightly, not in obvious piles. "Why?" Mateo asked. Ruiz met his eyes. "Because if it crosses this, we learn something." The march resumed. The jungle grew denser, the air heavier. Sounds behaved strangely, echoing when they shouldn't, vanishing when they should have been close. Birds went quiet as they passed. Insects scattered in waves. More signs appeared. A pig carcass hanging from a tree split open, organs missing. No scavenger marks. No blood trail leading away. A deer collapsed near the path, eyes glassy, tongue darkened, as if drained from within. Castano crossed himself. Figueroa stopped joking. Even Ortega grew quieter. They reached the main village by afternoon. It looked abandoned. Huts stood intact, fires cold. Cooking pots still set out, rice hardened at the bottom. Tools lay where they had been dropped, as if everyone had left at once. Miguel felt the hairs rise on his arms. Villages did not empty like this unless something chased them out, or unless something walked among them. They searched the huts methodically. No bodies, no signs of battle, just fear frozen into place. In the center of the village stood a larger structure, part meeting house, part chapel. Inside, they found symbols scratched into the floor, crude crosses, circles of ash, clawed marks on the wooden posts, deep enough to splinter the grain. Fray Esteban stared at them longer than necessary. "These are not prayers," he said finally. As night approached, Ortega ordered the men to fortify their position. Fires were lit, muskets cleaned, ammunition counted. Ruiz argued they should leave before dark. Ortega refused. "This is exactly what they want," he said. "Fear flight." Stories. Ruiz stared at him. "Stories don't leave. Marks like that." Ortega turned away. Dusk fell fast. Too fast. The jungle swallowed the remaining light. And with it came the tapping again. This time came from multiple directions. Tap, 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 like fingers testing wood. Bamboo bone. Mateo whispered that he heard his name. Miguel heard it too. Soft, familiar, spoken in a voice that sounded like his mother's. He knew better than to answer. The tapping grew closer. Salt lines were crossed, disturbed, smeared, broken. Something moved between the huts. Low and fast. Too fluid for a man. Too deliberate for an animal. Figueroa fired first. The musket blast tore through the night, lighting the village in white flame. The recoil knocked him back. A scream followed, but it did not come from where he fired. It came from behind them. Castano vanished. One moment he was there, reloading. The next he was gone. No cry, no struggle. Just the sound of something heavy landing beyond the fiery light. Miguel ran. Ruiz shouted for him to stop. Too late. They found
Castano
near the edge of the village. Body twisted unnaturally, neck bent at an angle that made Mateo vomit instantly. His chest was sunken, his face pale, drained, no blood spilled. Fray Esteban whispered a prayer and stepped back, making the sign of the cross again and again. Ortega's certainty shattered. "This ends now," he said, voice shaking. "We hunted." Ruiz grabbed his arm hard enough to hurt. "You don't hunt something like this," he said. "You survive it." Something laughed from the trees. Not loud, not mocking, curious, as if pleased. And then the fires went out all at once, as if blown by a single breath. And in the darkness that followed, the tapping stopped, because whatever it was had already chosen its next target. When the fires died, the soldiers learned the worst truth of all. The creature didn't need darkness. Darkness was simply its choice. For several seconds after the fires went out, no one moved. No one breathed loudly. No one spoke. The village was swallowed whole by darkness so thick it felt solid, pressing against eyes and lungs alike. Miguel could hear his own heartbeat hammering in his ears, louder than the insects, louder than the distant river. Then something moved. Not fast, not careless, deliberate. A soft scrape passed close enough that Miguel felt air shift against his leg. He raised his musket slowly, terrified of the sound it might make. Somewhere nearby, Mateo whimpered before forcing himself silent. Lieutenant Ortega tried to reassert control. "Hold position," he whispered harshly. "No one fires without my order." The jungle answered him with a sound that did not belong to any animal Miguel knew. A wet click, followed by a slow exhale. Something circled them. Sergeant Ruiz reached into his pouch and scattered salt in a wide arc around their position. It landed softly, barely visible in the dark. He did not say a word, but every man watched him like a drowning sailor watches rope. For a moment, just a moment, nothing happened. Then a shape crossed the line. The salt shifted, dragged aside as if brushed by a passing limb. Ruiz's jaw tightened. "It's learned," he muttered. The creature struck without warning. Figueroa screamed as something slammed into him from behind, lifting him off his feet. His musket fired wildly into the night. The flash revealed a shape clinging to his back, long-limbed, crouched wrong. Its head bent at an angle no human neck could manage. The image burned into Miguel's eyes. Then the darkness swallowed it again. Figueroa's scream cut short. When the soldiers rushed forward, they found him crumpled near a hut, body slack, eyes rolled back. His chest barely moved. Dark stains marked his mouth, but there was no wound. Fray Esteban dropped to his knees beside him. "It feeds," he whispered, "not on flesh alone." Ortega staggered backward, denial finally breaking. "This is impossible," he said. "This is hysteria, poison, mass panic." The jungle responded with a voice, a human voice. "Lieutenant." It sounded like Castano. Miguel's blood ran cold. Castano was dead. They had buried him with their own hands. The voice came again, closer. Now, softer, almost pleading. Mateo turned instinctively toward it. Miguel grabbed his arm just in time. "No," Miguel hissed. "Don't answer. Don't look." The voice changed. It became a woman's, then a child's, each one perfectly formed. "Each one wrong," Ruiz shouted, eyes down, ears closed if you can. The men pressed fingers into ears, but the sound slipped through anyway, vibrating inside their skulls. Miguel felt memories stirring faces. Voices from his past, things he had not thought about in years. The creature was not just hunting bodies, it was searching minds. They retreated into the largest structure in the village, barricading the doors with furniture and beams. Inside, They lit a single lantern, its flame weak and shaking. 4 soldiers remained. 8 had entered the jungle. Miguel counted again to be sure. Ortega sat against a wall, staring at nothing. Its authority had drained away with the firelight. Mateo shook uncontrollably, lips moving in silent prayer. Fray Esteban clutched his rosary so tightly his knuckles bled. Ruiz alone remained focused. He drew lines of salt across the thresholds, hung garlic from broken beams, and placed the stingray tail above the door. "Will it stop it?" Miguel asked. Ruiz shook his head. "No," he said, "but it might slow it. And sometimes that's enough." Outside, footsteps circled the building, slow, patient. Something scratched at the walls. Long nails dragged across wood, testing for weakness. The lantern flickered violently, casting shadows that moved independently of any body. Then came laughter, quiet, curious, almost amused. The door shuddered as something leaned against it. Mateo sobbed. "It knows we're here," "Yes," Ruiz said, "because it wants us to know." The pressure eased. Footsteps moved away. Twisely, Miguel realized the truth at the same time Ruiz did. "It's not trying to break in," Miguel said. Ruiz nodded grimly. "It's waiting." Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time unraveled inside that room. Just before dawn, the scratching stopped. The jungle sounds returned cautiously, as if testing whether it was safe to breathe again. Ortega rose shakily. "We leave," he said. Now, at first light, no one argued. They slipped out as the sky began to pale, stepping carefully over salt lines and bodies alike. The village looked untouched in daylight, peaceful, innocent. That was the lie that nearly killed them. They had not gone far when the scream came. Fray Esteban Miguel turned, just in time to see him lifted backward into the trees, his rosary snapping and scattering beads across the ground. He vanished without a sound. Gone. Just like that, Mateo broke and ran. Miguel chased him, shouting, but panic gave Mateo speed. The jungle swallowed him within seconds. Ruiz cursed and followed. Ortega froze. Miguel grabbed him. He shouted something, dropped from above. Ruiz screamed once, a sharp, furious sound, then fell silent. Miguel ran. Branches tore at his face. Roots caught his feet. Behind him, something followed without effort, keeping pace. Enjoying the chase, he burst through foliage and stumbled onto the riverbank. The boat's still there. Miguel dove into one, shoving it into the water, paddling with bare hands as fast as he could. The river pulled him away from the shore. He looked back once, at the edge of the trees. Something stood watching, tall, thin, still, its head tilted, listening. Then it smiled. Not with joy. With recognition, Miguel paddled until his arms failed. He reached the coastal post alone. Of the 8 men sent inland, only 1 returned. Miguel gave his report. He used careful words. He avoided names like Aswang. He spoke of ambushes, hysteria, unknown predators. The report was filed, then buried. The village was marked abandoned. No further expeditions were sent, but locals still warn travelers, they say. If the jungle grows quiet too quickly, if you hear a familiar voice calling your name at night, do not answer. Because some things learned how to wear us, and once they have your voice, they never let it go. Miguel escaped the jungle, but the jungle did not release him, because what followed him back to civilization was not a wound you could see. Corporal Miguel de Roas did not sleep for 3 days after returning to the coastal post. Whenever he closed his eyes, he heard the tapping again. Slow, testing, patient, as if something waited just beyond the edge of thought. Listening for him to weaken, the commandant demanded a full account. Miguel gave it measured, careful, stripped of anything that sounded like madness. He spoke of ambushes, of a nocturnal predator, of panic spreading among the men. He did not say Aswang. He did not describe the voice that wore his mother's tone. He did not explain how Sergeant Ruiz screamed without bleeding. Some truths could not survive ink. The commandant nodded as if Satisfied, though his eyes betrayed doubt, he ordered the report sealed and forwarded to Manila with a recommendation. No further inland patrols until conditions stabilized. Conditions never stabilized. Within weeks, rumors spread faster than any official notice. Porters refused inland routes. Traders detoured days out of their way. Entire families abandoned farms that had fed them for generations. At night, fires burned longer, brighter, ringed with salt and thorns. Dogs were kept inside or not kept at all. Miguel noticed the change. Immediately, fear had become organized. In Manila, whispers followed him. Servants crossed themselves when he passed. A dock worker asked him quietly. It was true that the jungle now spoke with the voices of the dead. Miguel did not answer. He requested reassignment instead. He was summoned to Intramuros. The meeting took place inside a stone chamber meant to muffle sound. A friar sat beside a colonial official. Neither smiled. They asked Miguel to repeat his account. This time, they asked different questions. Did the villagers prepare defenses? Did the creature mimic voices? Did it drain blood or something else? Miguel realized then that this was not the first report of its kind. Fray Esteban had not been sent by chance. The friar leaned forward. You survived because you ran, he said calmly. And because you did not answer when it called. Miguel asked the question he had avoided since the riverbank. What was it? The friar hesitated, then spoke words that were never meant for official record. He said the Aswang was not one thing. It was a name given to many shapes, many hungers. Some walked as animals, some flew. Some wore the skin of people and lived among them for years before feeding. What united them was not form but method. They isolate, the friar said. They learn. Wait. He explained that salt, garlic, vinegar, none of these were weapons. They were tests, boundaries, ways to measure intent. If it crosses salt, the friar said, it has chosen you. Miguel thought of the disturbed line. The dragged crystals. The friar continued. Aswang do not always kill, he said. Sometimes they mark. Sometimes they follow. Miguel felt cold. The official dismissed the meeting shortly after. Miguel was ordered to remain in Manila and assigned clerical duties, paperwork, inventories, things that kept him away from jungles and rivers. On paper, it was mercy. In truth, it was containment. Months passed. Miguel tried to live, but the city had changed for him. Streets felt narrower at night. Shadows lingered too long. He began to recognize a pattern in the sounds around him, footsteps that matched his pace, pauses that mirrored his stops. Once late at night, he heard a voice outside. His window, his name, spoken gently. He did not move. He did not look by morning. There were scratch marks on the shutters. Then came the second report. A patrol near another inland settlement vanished without a trace. No bodies, no blood. Just abandoned packs and a boat drifting empty downriver. The official response was swift. Blame bandits. Close the route. Silence the witnesses. Miguel was summoned again, this time by a different friar. One older, quieter, a man who listened more than he spoke. You've been noticed, friar said. Miguel asked, by whom. The friar did not answer directly. Instead, he handed Miguel a bundle of notes, confessions, letters, testimonies collected over decades. Some dated back before Spanish arrival. Some were written by missionaries who later died in accidents. Illnesses, disappearances. Each told a similar story. A thing that learned voices. A thing that punished curiosity. A thing that followed survivors. One line appeared again and again, written in different hands. If it lets you live. It is not finished with you, Miguel began to understand. Survival was not victory, it was selection. He was allowed to escape because escape served a purpose. Carriers spread stories. Stories spread fear. Fear cleared land. The jungle did not want soldiers, it wanted space. That night, Miguel packed his belongings. He requested leave under the excuse of illness. It was granted quickly, too quickly, as he left the city walls. He felt watched, not from rooftops, from memory. He traveled north, away from the river routes, away from known villages. He avoided jungles when possible, slept with salt beneath his bed. never traveled alone at night. Years passed, Miguel aged. But some nights, when the wind moved just right, he heard tapping on wood. Always 3 beats, always patient. He never answered. The final record of Corporal Miguel de Roas appears in a church ledger dated 11 years later. It notes his death as natural causes. No details, but a margin note-written. By a different hand mentions that neighbors reported hearing voices coming from his house for several nights after his passing. Voices that sounded like him calling out, asking for help. The house was later burned. No one claimed the land. Today, historians debate the events of 1768. Some call it mass hysteria. Some blame tropical disease. Some say the story grew in the telling. But in the Philippines, the warnings remain unchanged. If the jungle falls silent too quickly, if a voice you trust calls your name after dark, do not answer, because the Aswang does not always kill you. The records were sealed. The witnesses disappeared. But the pattern didn't stop, because whatever hunted in 1768 was still learning. Long after Miguel de Roas was buried, the jungle continued its work. Spanish records from the late 1700s show a quiet shift in policy. Inland patrols became rare. Trade routes were redirected. Missionaries were warned off the recorder to avoid certain valleys after dusk. Entire regions were labeled unproductive and quietly abandoned by the administration. No official reason was ever given. But if you read between the lines, missing ledgers, interrupted correspondence, parishes reassigned without explanation, a shape begins to form. Not of a single event, but of repetition. The same story retold without names. A village goes silent. A patrol investigates. Some return changed. Most do not return at all. And always the witnesses describe the same details. Voices. Silence. No blood. One such account surfaced nearly 20 years later in a mission journal kept by Father Alonso Very. His writing is careful, restrained, clearly meant to survive scrutiny. Yet even through that restraint, fear leaks like ink through paper. He writes of arriving at a settlement already half abandoned, of huts reinforced with salt lines and thorns, of people who slept in shifts, never all at once. He writes of a woman who begged him not to pray aloud at night. She said, "Sound carries," the journal notes, and something listens. Father Very dismissed it publicly. Privately, he wrote something else. On the 3rd night, he heard his name spoken from outside the chapel. Not shouted, not whispered. Spoken with familiarity, he recognized the voice. It belonged to his brother, dead 5 years by then. Very did not answer. By morning, there were marks on the chapel door. Long, parallel, deep enough to leave splinters curled like fingernails. The journal ends abruptly 2 days later. There is no record of Father Varia's reassignment, no grave. This is where historians often stop, because beyond this point, the evidence stops behaving like history. It behaves like warning. Local oral accounts fill the gaps the records refuse to touch. They speak of false survivors, people who returned from the jungle, but were no longer quite right. People who spoke less, slept less, whose shadows sometimes moved before they did. Children were warned not to follow them. Animals avoided them. And when these survivors died, their deaths were never quiet. Neighbors reported voices coming from empty rooms, footsteps where no one stood, laughter that did not belong to the living or the dead. In some cases, the houses were burned before burial, not out of anger, out of precaution. By the early 1800s, Spanish missionaries began quietly documenting countermeasures. Not weapons, there were none, but behaviors. Rules to survive encounters. Never travel alone after dusk. Never answer a voice you cannot see. Never follow familiar sounds into unfamiliar places. If salt fails, leave immediately. If it lets you go, do not return. One margin note, written in a cramped, shaking hand, reads, "It chooses. We do not." What terrified the clergy most was not the violence. It was the restraint. Animals kill to eat. Men kill to conquer. Disease kills without thought. But the Aswang, whatever its true nature, demonstrated patience. It waited until patrols relaxed, until fires burned low, until confidence replaced fear, and then it acted. Never randomly, always efficiently. One document, buried deep in colonial archives, records an internal debate among administrators. It questions whether continued settlement of certain inland regions was worth the cost. Not in money, in morale. Soldiers refused postings. Friars requested transfers. Entire companies began inventing illnesses to avoid assignments upriver. Fear had become contagious, and fear in an empire is dangerous. The final recommendation was simple: withdraw. Let the jungle have its dead ground. But the jungle was not finished. Because it had learned something new. It had learned that humans carry stories, and stories travel farther than claws. In the mid-1800s, accounts of Aswang-like encounters began appearing far from the original regions. Different provinces, different terrain, same behaviors. Voices calling from trees. Livestock drained overnight. Victims found intact, pale, untouched by scavengers. Some scholars argue this was myth spreading. Others point to something more unsettling: adaptation. As roads expanded, so did the stories. As populations grew, encounters became rarer but more precise. The creature did not vanish. It adjusted. Anthropologists note something else. Aswang stories do not warn against curiosity. They warn against recognition. Most monsters chase. This one calls. It does not need to outrun you. It needs you teeth. They never saw the creature, but they heard each other calling out from different directions. One by one, the voices overlapped perfectly, until no one knew which voice belonged to whom. Not dominate through strength. They dominate through understanding. Modern historians still debate whether the Aswang was ever real in a biological sense. Some suggest rare animals. Others propose ergot poisoning, sleep paralysis, shared psychosis. But these explanations stumble over the same detail. Independent witnesses. Same behaviors. Same outcomes. Across centuries. Because if it was only fear, fear would not leave marks. Fear would not learn voices. Fear would not let survivors go just to follow them home. The jungle no longer belongs to empires, but it remembers them. And in some places, when night falls too suddenly, locals still draw salt lines without knowing why. They still avoid speaking names after dark. They still tell children not to answer voices that sound like family. They don't say Aswang loudly. They don't need to, because the warning is older than the word.